Welcome to this webinar on how to create person-centered positive behaviour support plans. Positive behaviour support is one of the most powerful frameworks in learning disability care, but only if used correctly. Too many providers even, are still stuck in the loop of reactive approaches to behaviour when the emphasis should be on empowering an individual to have more autonomy over their lifestyle and environment. Now, we're very excited to be joined by care sector expert Mark Tops, who will host this webinar with Positive Behaviour Support Specialist Giuseppe Di Martino, Strategic Commissioner for Learning Disability and Autism for Slough Borough Council. Together, they will guide you through best practices for setting up an effective positive behaviour support plan for a new service user joining your organisation. So I'm very happy to hand you over to Mark and Giuseppe. If you have any questions, please drop these into the chat and we'll get these answered for you at the end.
Thank you very much for that. So, hello, Giuseppe. Thank you for joining me today. And I think before we dive into the conversation, are you able just to do a quick introduction into who you are and kind of your background with regards to positive behaviour support plans?
Very happily. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Giuseppe Di Martino, as the slide says there, and currently I'm the Strategic Commissioner at Slough Borough Council for Learning Disability and Autism. I come as a background as a psychologist, and I was ABA trained. When didn't really sit very well with me the ABA approach, which is very heavy on service user. And when I arrived in England, I found out about the PBS model. I trained myself up to the coaching level, and I've covered several operational roles within an organization, which is Look Ahead Care and Support, up to senior operational roles, where I implemented PBS quite effectively and successfully in a long series of services. And we actually moved a very large number of people out of long-term residential settings and hospital into community settings with very minimal level of restriction by using PBS correctly. I'm actually a PBS enthusiast and coach, I would say. Enthusiast firstly and coach afterwards.
Thank you very much. So before we dive into the plans themselves, how would you introduce positive behaviour support, or PBS, that we'll probably use going forward?
I would say that positive behaviour support is very much a value-based approach that focuses on the strength of an individual, and is actually, rather than what often has been thought about preventing or managing, which is managing incidents or behaviors of distress that a service user may experience, is actually how to work with them and the entire network of professionals and carers in improving their quality of life in order for these behaviors not to appear at all. Because obviously the opposite of distress is positive engagement and good quality of life. So PBS is a model to enhance individuals' quality of life, especially those who don't have the abilities to actually communicate effectively their needs, which often happens in learning disability and autism.
No, thank you very much. And I like there that you use the words behaviours of distress, and I just wrote that down. And I think PBS, from my experience of having to implement it with people that we've supported in learning disability homes, actually it's a whole cultural shift for the staff team, the person that's being supported. And actually we quite often get mixed up with what terminology should we use, whether it's challenging behaviours, behaviours that challenge, behaviours of distress. Where does the wording come in around how we change kind of the behaviours within our organisation, that kind of culture and our approach to behaviours?
I think language is very important. I always think of words as stones. If we assume that the behavior is challenging, somehow we are putting ourselves in a role that we are the one being challenged, and therefore the intervention is about us not being challenged. However, I believe, and I've personally experienced that, when a service user is in a situation of distress, when they show the behaviors that we are trying to prevent or trying to manage somehow, I believe that they are the first one who are in a situation of not being particularly happy in those occasions. Therefore, if we switch the narrative to focus on the service user and their distress, it becomes even more compelling, the value-based approach on how we improve their emotional status to a point in which they are actually comfortable, safe, and in return, our staff teams will be safe as well. Therefore, I prefer the wording behavior of distress because it focuses on the service user, which is actually, should be at least at the center of your intervention, whichever the intervention is, should be person-centered. And the person is your service user, not the challenge, if there is ever a challenge there, person observing the behavior. Obviously, I believe challenging behaviors comes from a medical model in which the service user or the patients in the clinical context is a sort of a passive entity that receive a treatment, to what it is our model, the social model, where actually the person is at the center of the support that they receive. Therefore, the language should reflect that. Or so I believe, at least.
Yeah, no, definitely. And thank you very much for that. And definitely something I'll use wording-wise going forward myself. So PBS plans themselves, let's dive into that conversation. So what are the key components of a PBS plan?
Well, the PBS plan, first of all, of course, with the context of promoting an increased quality of life, inclusion, participation, and the social role that our intervention has in every single person. Therefore, I believe it is probably made of, first of all, a very good understanding of your service user, which you can gather directly from them when they are capable to do so. And in many cases, they are. So I would say the first and foremost element is focused on the communication. The communication and how to communicate effectively with your service user will actually help you to understand what are their struggles, what are their difficulties, but first and foremost, what are their strengths. Because as we said, it needs to be a strength-based approach. The second element that I believe is really fundamental is the engagement. Therefore, a very good PBS plan should be very comprehensive of all those activities, tasks, and opportunities that a person could actually positively engage with, participate in, and having a center role in doing so. I like to make always a very simple example about that, actually. I'm Italian, right? And we are very with people when it comes to our coffee, right? So there's no chance somebody can make the best coffee will never be my coffee. Therefore, PBS needs to be very much focused on giving your service user agency on what they do. Because as great as the support they will receive, if they are an active role in that support, obviously that engagement will drastically reduce the level of anxiety. I think Build, who's one of the main promoters of the PBS model, tends to do a comparison with the hotel model, which is actually when everything is done for you and being actually instead engaged in your support. Therefore, your PBS plan should definitely involve, together with all the activities that the service user may be engaging with and may like to engage with, obviously, the way that they can be positively made protagonists of these events. There are a series of techniques that obviously we will not go into details right now, but I'm very keen to share maybe some resources afterwards with the audience that can give a bit more of an insight on how to achieve such results. And then the last element of the PBS, because we need to be honest, incidents are bound to happen. Even in the best settings, there is still occasion in which you don't get it 100% right, or simply somebody has a series of distressing element that we may not pick immediately on. There is the part of the PBS plan which is related to the management of incident or prevention of so. This should include proactive strategies, which is actually all the things that you can put in place to avoid an escalation of the incident. And again, in this part is very fundamental, the communication element to it. Then you have a part with reactive strategies, generally a much smaller piece of work is when let's say things have escalated to a point that is not able anymore to prevent such escalation, and therefore how you deal with your service user. And you should always bear in mind that as a value-based approach, the level of restriction that you should put in place or you may put in place should be reduced to an absolute minimum. Because I make an example, rather than restraining a service user, a measure that I've been using in the past is the staff remove themselves from the situation, ensuring that the environment around is safe. So you leave space to the person, you leave agency to the person in their own environment while protecting your staff team, which is a paramount for every organization, I suppose. And the last, and again, very important element is how you recover from those reactive strategies, because there is always a stigma attached to the behavior. And I think it creates a level of atmosphere in which the service user may experience some sentiment of guilt, because I truly believe that they are not challenging for the sake of it. They are experiencing distress, as we said before. They are trying to communicate you something. Every behavior is a form of communication. Therefore, how you sort of repair that relationship with the service user. Therefore, you should have in there activities that they may enjoy, maybe some time with the staff, to go back to that level of emotional safety, where actually the service user and the staff could repair that relationship that may feel broken. It's a bit like, I know it's not very much the same, but let's say it's a bit like when you argue with your partner. As much as you're right, you kind of feel bad afterwards, don't you? I think it happens the same, because this is a job made of relationship. So that relationship is very important. And in considering all these, let's call the section of your PBS plan. So how do you communicate with your service user? What type of activities are there? What tools do you use to introduce every new element to the environment or to their routines? There has to be a very, very, very strong consistency on how this is approached by the team members, which is why I like to say that generally PBS is something that is organization-wide. People need to think in a way and communicate in a way and act in a way that is very consistent, which also reduces the level of distress quite significantly. Because if the environment is predictable, if the environment is safe and the environment is capable, we tend to call it capable environment, actually, in PBS coaching slang, let's say. Then obviously, again, you reduce the distress. Therefore, PBS is all about how we don't get there at all. How do we do our best effort to make somebody's life so positive, or as positive as possible, because nothing is perfect in this world, unfortunately. How do we go about improving their quality of life? So PBS is a tool to improve quality of life, and this should be at the center of all the approach to it. Being a job of relationship, communication is number one there on top, really. Yes.
No, absolutely. Thank you very much. And a few things that I really took away from there is around that consistency. And I think you'll have staff that are supporting the people that you're looking after that might have supported them for a number of years, that think they know them really well. But actually, it might be that they've got to do something different with this PBS plan. And it's actually coming on that journey for the greater good of that person, like you said, to improve the quality of life. And just that reminder that actually all behaviours are a form of communication, because I think a lot of us know that. I think sometimes in the heat of the moment, actually, that might go out the window and we forget that about actually what that person's trying to explain and trying to tell us. You spoke around involving the person and person-centered care, and I think a PBS plan is very person-centered. Are there any tips that you could share of how you can get the best out of the individual, involving the family, involving those key staff that know that service user really well, to create the PBS plan?
Definitely. I believe there are a long series of tools that help you both to identify the behavior and understand what's the communication behind those. Most of these, you find them actually as free, common creative resources online, which is great. Some, unfortunately, needs to be purchased. But as instance, the one I love the most is the motivation assessment scale. is something that you would do sitting firstly with your service user in case they actually are able to participate with you into that. But if I have to be honest, as much as a person doesn't really communicate verbally, they're still communicating with you. They're still telling you things. Verbal communication, we know, is a very little part of the actual communication. Therefore, in a series of trials and error, because it's very much trial and error, unfortunately, before you get it right, you will get it wrong quite a lot of times, actually, hopefully without serious consequences to your staff or service user. You can try to introduce activities that you may think your service user like, record what their reaction to those activities are, how they engage with these activities. The famous, I think this is quite common to many providers. It's not often used very positively, because I have, by experience actually, maybe I'm wrong, I've always seen use it in incident context. However, you should use what is called ABC chart, the famous antecedent behavior consequence chart, always, literally always. So if I bring you a cake, the antecedent is that I'm bringing you a cake that has, I don't know, strawberry frosty on top. I'm just making things up here. Strawberry frosty on top, and your service user just throw it up into the air. So that's the behavior. And then the consequences may be different activities has been introduced, that the service user withdraw to their bedroom. And so you may start to make assumptions based on those data on what is the element that didn't really work out in that context. Was it the frosty? Was it the cake? Maybe they prefer a scone. Maybe they prefer a sandwich. And you go a trial and error to see exactly what is that your service user was trying to communicate with that behavior that you experienced. Sometimes it may be due to environmental situations. So it's very important that you record those information about the environment. Is it dark? Is it very well lit? Is it noisy? Is it too quiet? Is it too crowded? There are not as many people. Usually crowd is 9 times out of 10. Crowd is generally quite a good trigger, especially when it comes to learning disability and autism. The motivational assessment scale is something that you can use also with their carers, and generally they will be your best source of information. However, carers, in my experience, they've always come from a very good place of wanting to help, but like all of our moms, probably, they tend to step in and do it instead of letting us do, right? And this is what staff tends to do with service user as well. So I believe it's also learning how to tolerate that frustration of not getting it right immediately. And here management is very important on that aspect, because you need to support your staff as they support your service user at the end of the day. So you sit down with the carers and try to understand as many information as possible on what was the person's routine when they were at home, what they did like to do, what they were engaging very well with, where the main struggles were. Because at the same time, you can use PBS plan and some surrogate, let's say, of ABA techniques to introducing new skills to actually improve the arrays of opportunity that the person has in the community. I remember a while ago, we were working with what was deemed to be a very complex need from a behavioral perspective service user. To be honest, I never really experienced such heightened behavior personally. So either we did a good job or the assessment was wrong, one or the other, actually. She were not able to cook at all. However, we started to introduce cooking activities backwards. So you start from the last step. As instance, we bake a pizza. The first action that the service user was doing was just pulling the pizza out of the oven and then eating it, because the reward there is immediate and you feel very gratified of something that you have achieved. You know, this is my pizza. I pulled it out of the oven. So it's very much that level of agency, and understand what your service user has already agency on. So that is like your 70% of work. And then the rest is how you can actually introduce new things to the service user day-to-day routine. In an ideal world, you will do that with professional as well. However, I work for the local authority right now, and I'm aware local authority staffing is generally terribly stretched. And you may not receive the attention that you need from your social worker or the clinical team or the multidisciplinary team, actually. Although their involvement is fundamental, sometimes you need to do the hard work yourself in creating the plan, implementing the plan, and evaluating the plan. It's always something that is where the onus is on the providers most of the times. However, the clinical team as well is a very good source of information because they may have known the service user already, and they may bring to the table the clinical expertise that sometimes is missing within organization, especially small organizations. They rarely have clinical teams. Collating all this information through the ABC, the motivational assessment, will allow you to have a very good pictures of your service user and their strength. Another very great tool that I like, which is really not PBS linked, is actually, I think is used in almost every care context, is the quality of life index or the subjective quality of life index. Therefore, you have this table with a long series of activities, which are not exhaustive. You can always add on to it. You have things like, I don't know, gardening or listening to music, browsing the internet, watch TV, dancing, whichever, basically. You can start to gather information on those activities and all the activities that you will go about introducing in a service user's routine. Always make sure you do that with consent from your service user, by the way. Maybe we should have said that from the beginning, I suppose. I just give it as granted that everything you do pass through service user consent, because otherwise we are in breach of the law, I suppose. So once you introduce those things, you can observe how they react to it, whether their engagement is kind of lukewarm, yeah, I sort of like these activities, or like, wow, this is fantastic. You build more of these into their routine. It's a bit like making sure that the most of their routine is highly gratifying for them, because when we feel gratified, we feel good about ourselves, and we are less likely to experience distress again. So I believe these are probably the main tools that can be used by professionals to inform the PBS plan, and by consequence is also service users' routine, as well as to communicate with service user. Obviously, you have things like talking maths that are very useful. Some service users use Makaton. However, as the years goes by, I see way less people than 10, 15 years ago when I started using Makaton, because obviously it requires a proper training. You can communicate with gesture, you know, like, would you like this, showing the actual object, and then, you know, inform the activities. When it comes to the activities to prevent a load of distress, I find very useful to build into PBS plan tools like social stories. They are not always the most effective in learning disabilities. They seem to be highly effective with clients who have autism instead. Autistic clients respond to, not everybody is the same, obviously, every person is different, but the majority of the people I've been working with who were autistic respond to social story very well, because it allows you to sort of anticipate what will come after. Let's make an example. I love examples. When you go to the movies, you know already that firstly you buy the ticket, then maybe you take the popcorns, then you are shown to which is the screening room that you are seeing the movies, what's your seat, then there are advertisements first, then there is the movie, then movie finish, you get out of the cinema. I know that, you know that, and if you don't know, you still go, you know, with the flow. For someone with a learning disabilities or autistic, this becomes a much more daunting task to navigate. Therefore, it's very important that those communications are very clear beforehand, so they know what to expect from an activities. They know, sort of, again, making the environment around them predictable. And all this information should absolutely be included in your PBS plan. Your PBS plan is basically, we cannot call it a snapshot, because a very good PBS plan tends to be very thick, generally, actually. But it's quite a description of what your service user does, how they do it, how they like to do it, and where your support and help is needed to achieve that. Again, I may sound like a broken record, but communication is literally everything. And it's important that staff nails that down to a T. I'll make you another example. If I'll call this a shirt, or I'll call this a robe, or I'll call this a vest, for me may make no difference at all. I know what you're talking about. For your service user, it may and may not be the same. So it's very important that if we call this a shirt, that is always a shirt. It's nothing else but a shirt. Because otherwise we create a level of anxiety that couldn't be managed and therefore is demonstrated in behaviors. Maybe I went too long.
No, not at all. And I think you made some really good points there. And I love the examples and actually how something for us every day is very simple. The example there of the cinema, but actually supporting somebody. And I'm sure most people watching this webinar will know actually the steps that it takes to support somebody to do an activity that we take for granted. Mm-hmm. I think it was really good that you spoke around the professional input. And I know that you and I have spoken previously about how, years ago, you'd have just picked up the phone to that crisis team, you'd have been referred, and you'd have somebody out probably the next week or 2 weeks down the line. And now you're waiting kind of almost up to a year, if not longer in some local authorities. But actually having this PBS that you can create with your team, with the person, with their family, actually gives you the stepping stone for when that professional comes in to review it and then put something further in place. You spoke around environment, and I just wanted to touch on one thing, because obviously the PBS plan isn't going to be an overnight document that you can just create. What's the best environment to be in for the person being supported to get the best out of the PBS plan during that kind of development stage?
Predictable environment. It needs to be highly predictable. Therefore, things like having a very clear timetable that the service user can access. To be honest, I've never been a big fan of timetables, but I understand the roles that they can have in managing anxiety. Obviously, it doesn't need to be forced on your service user. That just doesn't work. It wouldn't work for you. Why should it work for your service user, actually? So having a clear timetable, a clear evidence of who will be on shift, when, at what time, their pictures. What we used to do is also having a bit of a sort of description of what staffs, who they are, what they like to do. Because again, being a relationship, if you kind of match the interest of that person, assistants, I had a guy liked football. I found a lot of difficulties to work with them. I'm not shy to admit that, because I know nothing about football. Therefore, I went and studied and learned a lot of things about football because that was their interest. So if you have somebody with the same interest, passion, that link comes in immediately, because we are attracted by people who have our own views and have our own interests. It's just human nature, isn't it? So making the environment very clear, knowing the premises very well. Assistants, when I had service user moving into services, which actually we created bespoke, so probably in our case was particularly easier than it generally is in already existing settings. You start from visiting firstly showing the service user pictures of the place. How does it look like? Then they start to have maybe some visit there, and you can plan to have an activities that they enjoy in the service. So they associate maybe that environment to something that is pleasant for them. I want to go to the comic book store because there's Batman comic books, I don't want to go to the shop because there's no comic books there. Assistants, just to make, I've been in that situation, actually, that's why. Then another important element is slowly they can bring stuff that are their own into the environment to make it, we say personalized, but actually just their own environment. So maybe I have this this Batman statue that I like, I'll bring it there, so I'm a bit more motivated to go there. It feels more like familiar to me. It's important to control noises, level of lightning, because what I've noticed, obviously you can never generalize, but neon light tend to be very annoying for people who present some sort of hypersensitivity. So the environment needs to be predictable and, again, capable. As long as your service user is able to do things, you need to let them do. Your staff should do very little, honestly, when a service user is actually capable to do something. If somebody can wash their hands, you shouldn't help them to do so. You should let them do it. You can maybe prompt them, guide them. You should slowly make yourself redundant, actually. I think that is the key. The good PBS would make you feel sort of useless in that environment, because the service user knows, and the service user can, and the service user will do things. So that is the best environment, capable and predictable. I believe also all the professionals and enthusiasts that are joining us today are very well aware of the fact that learning disability, and especially the comorbidity with autism, comes with a very high level of anxiety. If the environment is predictable, the anxiety reduces. If I am an active actor in what happens in my day-to-day life, the anxiety reduces. Receiving something is not the same as doing it yourself. And obviously, as I mentioned before, there are techniques which are mainly ABA derived, although don't have anything to do with ABA. It's just a tool and a task that you use to actually do those activities. You can start with mirroring, then going on with slowly supporting maybe their hands to do something, and then move to verbal prompt, and then, step backward and backward and backward, giving them as much agency as possible. You find some resources, I believe, probably on Build website, on how to create a capable environment, including there is a sort of I would call it, on how the organization themselves can actually rate how PBS friendly their environment is. We're very happy to share with the group later on.
Yeah, no, that would be really good, thank you. And I think if there is anybody that is watching that wants to know more about creating that capable environment, all local authorities should have a re-ablement provider. Predominantly will be for older people, and I'm saying this because I'm a regional business manager for one. Get in touch with that provider, because I'm sure they will give you some of their tools that they use to support people to remain independent and to be independent and that capable environment. So definitely reach out to either, if you know the provider, or the local authority. Giuseppe, last question from me before I hand back to the guys at Log My Care. We've got the PBS plan. We've spoken around how it needs to be a team effort, that everybody needs buy-in. Any tips for how you successfully embed the PBS plan into the organisation so that it works for that individual?
Yes. Personally, the first buy-in that you need is from a senior, very, very senior figure in the organization, because PBS will require a lot of time to be implemented. And of course, for an organization, time is money at the end of the day. As sad as it sounds, we need to be realistic on that. So you need buy-in from your senior leadership, and that buy-in, you can have it by focusing on the value-based of the approach, the evidence-based of the approach. My own experience, and as a commissioner, we love two things: positive stories and lots of data. That's what we love, actually, especially positive story, but with data. So the fact that this has a strong theoretical framework and is evidence-based, and the process can actually be mapped, can ensure much more buy-in from your senior leader in the organization, When it comes instead to cascading to your staff team, since they are at the forefront of the distress that is experienced by the service user, and sometimes, unfortunately, they may be exposed to some form of verbal abuse or physical abuse from service user. I have to say, the better you implement your PBS, the less likely that happen. Although sometimes service users just don't like some specific member of staff. It's normal, you cannot like everybody in your life. What I found brilliant is to have weekly reflective practice with the team. So we were sitting down and discussing, basically, it was not about service user. We were not discussing clients, was not a supervision, was not an appraisal, was not a performance management, none of this. Was literally about your staff member, their emotion, how they feel about the plan, if they feel it's working, what they think is not really effective in there, if we have missed something. Because let's be honest, as manager, see probably 10% of a life of a service user. Our staff knows way better what service users do on a day-to-day basis. So it was very much a way for the staff to have a safe space to express their concern, bring their suggestion, because as we said, is a tool that needs to be implemented by the whole organization. Therefore, their input is as important as the carer and the service user, because they are part of that plan. They bring it to life. Reflective practice, I think, has been the tool that has been the most effective in supporting staff in both understanding and implementing the PBS. Training is great. You need training. There is a lot of training out there. I think every provider probably has their own training provider for that. But training is not enough. Those training then needs to be sort of rehearsed with your staff team. So when they come with a concern about, I didn't feel safe in this situation because ABC, and actually ABC can be really your ABC chart in this circumstance, you can go and unpick what sort of action would make the staff more comfortable, because I believe when the client is expressing distress, even the staff doesn't feel particularly good. I mean, you need to be a very cold-hearted person not to feel bad when something like that happens, I've been there. I've always worked with very complex needs clients. I don't really like the word complex need, but I don't have any other better word for it. It's heartbreaking where they are in distress, maybe self-harming. It's really heartbreaking for the staff. So you need to care for your staff as well as they do with your service user. If your staff are not looked after, your service user have no chance, unfortunately. So I would suggest every provider to introduce reflective practice. And I believe there is a large number of local authorities who actually have LD nurses in place or clinical psychologists in place who would be very keen to come to your organization. Obviously not every week. You as a manager will have to do, again, the heavy lifting. But on a quarterly basis or so, there are many local authorities who would be keen to give you that support. I think that staff, when is heard, when is given the tool to actually do their job, feels empowered as much as your service user when is given agency to do their day-to-day task in life.
No, thank you very much. And you're absolutely right that you need that buy-in all the way from the top. And I know there probably will be providers, managers watching today that might not necessarily have that. Yeah. Any tips there if you haven't got buy-in? I think for me personally, it would be around pop in place the PBS that we've discussed today. Somebody from Log My Care is going to talk about the template that they have for it. But there's some simple things you spoke there around reflective practice, actually put in a debriefing session after incidents so the staff have got the opportunity to talk. That mental health wraparound support so that actually if staff aren't coping, if they've witnessed something, the service user self-harming or injuring either one of their colleagues or themselves, you've got charities like the Care Workers Charity, you've got Grace Cares that offer grants and support. And most local authorities have teamed up with a mental health charity within each area that you can tap in for free. So you don't need to spend money or very much money to be able to support your team. Any bits of advice there, Giuseppe, if they haven't got buy-in from kind of senior level teams?
For senior management, exactly, is the pointing out that a lot of those resources actually don't cost money, really don't. The way I did it actually, because I was in an organization that was very open-minded actually, but obviously everything that is new, senior level of business are generally risk adverse. They are not like operation. Operation is very much risk prone, but senior leadership generally is risk adverse. Is to use all of those tools that we talked about today: motivational assessment, ABC chart, quality of life tools, PERMA model. The last one, I can't remember the name, but is actually, what's it called? Capable environment framework. Actually, we've been speaking a lot about it, to be fair. And gather all those data. I think Log My Care would help you in that a lot, because being a digital tool, it will be much. I think I actually was a Log My Care user some couple of years ago. Actually, I've been using for quite a long time, and until probably 2 years ago. It helps you with managing reporting of situations. So if you are able to demonstrate that what you're doing makes sense and is grounded in theory and data, which is what generally gets on the table of a CEO, is reports with data. They don't really know about Jack, John, or Jill. They couldn't, because there's probably 500 Jack, John, and Jill in one organization, isn't it? This data will allow them to feel confident that the risk that they are taking is not reckless, and that actually the results are significant. Because the bottom line is, if you support a service user successfully, they transition out of secure units, hospitals, whatever that is, in the community, and slowly are able to reduce restriction and level of support, trust me, as a commissioner, I'm telling you, you will receive thousands of referrals, not two. And the bottom line of an organization is to increase their business. Therefore, doing a good job that is grounded in data will secure future business for the organization. If you are in an organization where there is an incident every week and nobody knows how to do it, and you need to lock door, trust me, commissioning team would be so keen to actually discuss with you the next referral at the end of the day. So I think that's what it is. Data, evidences, and positive outcomes, who will in return provide reassurance to senior leadership that the risk is a safe risk to take, and the potential future business that such model would bring into your organization. And since LogMic, I think still has it actually. I haven't seen the interface, but I'm pretty sure it does. It does reporting of how many incidents in this period of time there have been, how long did they last, and whatnot. This is literally the figures that could back up your passion for a model.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe. We're going to hand back over to Log My Care. They will be taking questions from the audience, so please do drop your questions in the chat. We should be joined by somebody from Log My Care shortly.
There you go.
Hello again. Hi, guys. Thanks so much for that. That was brilliant. Really, really informative and useful, I'm sure, for everyone. We're going to take a few questions from the messenger. So if anyone has anything that they haven't dropped in yet, do pop that in the chat, and we'd be happy to go over that. Carol there had a point about agency staff coming in and then the training being delivered to a reasonable level and people kind of moving on. How do you think you would go about kind of approaching that?
I wish I had a very good answer for it.
Tough one, I know. Sorry to chuck that at you, Giuseppe.
What we did, because unfortunately, especially during post-COVID, when there was what we call the Great Resignation, if we want, agency has been quite stable in every care organization, including where I used to work. It has been the biggest challenge, honestly, because honestly, you find amazing stuff, but they don't know the service unit. They just don't. They just work through the door today. The way we try to manage that is to ensure with an agency consistency of receiving the same care staff on a temporary basis, sometimes doing long temporary assignment, like a 3 months assignment, 6 months assignment, whether that is possible. Another way that we were finding very useful is the agent obviously is costly. I understand many providers may not feel very comfortable with that because the cost is quite significant. Only a big organization can absorb that. Is to have the agency staff to come before their shift, maybe 1 or 2 days before, to participate in some activities that the service user enjoys, so to be introduced to the service user, and to speak with other staff members to understand how to go about specific tasks during the day. The last and probably is the most common that I believe many providers do, or at least the one I've been talking to recently, they do that. So when you introduce an agency staff, you make sure that they are paired on shift with somebody who knows the service user well, and you have your permanent member of staff who knows the service user well to lead on the support, and the agency staff dedicated to more practical things, like, you know, removing the chairs from the environment or supporting with the cooking, things that are of a practical nature, because as great as they are, it'd be very difficult that they will communicate super effectively immediately. Another good thing is to provide the agency as much as possible with anonymized PBS plans, especially the communication section, which generally doesn't have a lot of personal information in it. But that doesn't always get cascaded to the staff member, I'm afraid. Or I've been in a situation in which actually the person came to the service and was like, have you seen the PBS plan? They were like, what? And you understand that, you know, they were not given basically the PBS plan. So yeah, either is a very long induction, which is costly, or is having the staff paired with a permanent member of the team focused on the task, or is them reading documents beforehand. The documents is the least effective one because paperwork doesn't really match people. It should do as much as possible, but it's not exactly the same. And then your service user, first and foremost, needs to be familiar with the agency staff. So introducing them is probably the first step, I suppose. But I have unfortunately experience of the more, and this is something you can actually gather in data, the more agency staff in the service, the highest the likelihood of incident. I've been there. Not always. And I have to say there are a few agencies that send you very well-trained staff, but they still don't know your service users, so it can be a challenge.
Thanks for that, Giuseppe. Really, really useful. There seem to be quite a lot of questions around kind of time pressures and limited resources, and how do you find the time to allocate to PBS? As you say, it's an ongoing process that's gonna need time devoted and set aside. Is there any tips you have for that in particular?
Often it's because the manager feels the onus of doing that daunting job, which if it's left to one person is probably a very long job. However, the way we were doing it, besides, again, some organizations have actually dedicated resources that makes it very easier, because I can think of 2-3 providers I've seen in the past who actually have dedicated team for PBS, but that's like literally 2 or 3 in the whole of England actually. What you do is to empower your staff team with that responsibility. Therefore, some of the members of your team who either spontaneously want to be developing further in the PBS aspect of the support, or who seems to have a better understanding of the service user, or really like to work. I had a lady actually, we wanted to offer her a team leader post. She could have won it because she wanted to work with the service user actually. There's plenty. Again, these are the people that make her great at the end of the day. Those are the people you should empower with the tools to do the job, because they are also the people who will look at the service user 24/7. You manager are there Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, unless you are like me and then are always in the service and forget you have a life, but that's another story. But yeah, your staff team should be empowered to do that. It's a collective effort. The collective effort reduces drastically the timing, because as a manager, I can only see a limited number of things. So 10 members of the staff see 10 times more, simple as that. And also they build a way better relationship than management with service user generally. Manager still is the authority. Staff is kind of your pal in the service in a way. So they may be better placed to inform those plans. You need management supervision, 100%. But I think empowering your staff team will reduce the cost and the timing needed for the support. And again, you don't need to do coaching programs unless you have the resources, because it's a great thing. It really opens your mind. But I believe majority of local authorities right now offer PBS training or ICB board. No, B stands for board already. Integrated care boards actually offer PBS training for free to many providers.
Makes total sense, Giuseppe, thanks. We have just time for one more. I wanted to wrap up with this one from Laurie. Do you think it's necessary for each and every person to have a PBS plan, or only those who pose a physical risk to themselves, others, or staff?
I would say that it is necessary having a PBS approach to your support planning, but not necessarily a PBS plan. You need a PBS plan when you work. I mean, the more complex the needs of the service user, especially from a behavioral perspective, the more you need a robust scientific, in a way, tool to deal with that. However, the PBS approach, the PERMA model, the famous PERMA model, which stands for, I can't really remember right now, it's positive relationship, engagement, positive emotion, engagement, relationship, meaning, and achievement. This should be the way you inform. The organization needs a PBS approach when they work with learning disability and autism service user, but not necessarily a PBS plan if there are not such challenges. You can get by with a communication plan, you can get by with a person-centered support plan, you can get by introducing simple ABC charts to understand what goes on in incident or situation that you don't clearly understand. But no, PBS plan as it is, like all the tools in it, is not mandatory. I would still recommend it actually, but it's not mandatory.
Yeah, great, understood. We've got so many brilliant questions there, and just to assure everyone, we will take our time to get back to you all following the session today, but unfortunately we don't have enough time to go through each and every one here and now. I just wanted to have a bit of a closer look at what the PBS framework looks like within Log My Care and give you guys a bit of context on kind of why we built this, how we designed it. So we originally designed the PBS planning feature with the aim of creating a collaborative, person-centered framework, as we've heard from Mark and Giuseppe, which would allow anyone, regardless of their expertise, to easily understand how best to support someone in order to minimize behavior escalation. And we chose to focus on PBS planning in particular as part of our ongoing effort to provide specific tools which have the greatest impact for services supporting adults with learning disabilities, a section of social care which we believe hasn't always been prioritized by digital solutions in the past. So let's take a closer look at exactly what it looks like. Fab. So you should be able to see my screen okay there. Brill. So this is the PBS framework here. We can see at the top we have a comment which is left by the person who has last performed a review, and they basically leave this for the team as the update for the notes from the review, as well as highlighting anything that's changed, so they can go straight to that area and read through the latest updates, the latest changes. And of course, this is set in collaboration. So we have a desired outcome that you set with the individual, giving them agency over what this looks like.
Richard, sorry, we can't see your screen.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I didn't know whether it was just our view presenting or not, and I was just waiting to see if anybody came into the chat, but a couple of people have just popped.
Thank you, Mark. There we go. Can you see that now okay?
Yep, we can see it, yep.
Awesome, we got there. So yeah, as I was saying, we've got this comment at the top, which is basically the highlight of what has been changed in the latest review, drawing your team to attention to that so they can go straight to that area. Then we have an outcome for the PBS plan that's created, as I say, in collaboration with the individual you're supporting. What are we looking to achieve from this? And then, of course, as with our risk assessments as well, you can see here, this is traffic lights scored based on those proactive strategies and the baseline behaviours. Now, as we've heard from Mark and Giuseppe, this should be the core focus of the PBS plan, covering what an individual basically needs in order to lead a fulfilled life. Everyone's baseline behaviour is going to be different, and fully understanding this for each individual you support, again, is going to be crucial to recognising when that behaviour may be escalating, as we'll see here, and those active strategies in order to notice that and deal with that. So the escalating behaviour, while a crucial part again, is reactive and shouldn't be the focus. It's important for us to recognise the signs of that escalating behaviour, and then we've got our active strategies there, such as environmental changes or comforting sensory tools listed for that person. Next up, we have crisis point and reactive strategies. Now, as mentioned, a successful PBS plan should lead to crisis points occurring more and more rarely, though it's important for you to be prepared and have some proactive strategies and some reactive ones in place as well. Now, we have an associated risk assessment attached here as well, which draws out actions for the team to be aware of. So how are we going to mitigate the risk that's been identified in this assessment that's attached? And again, as with our different stages of the PBS, this is traffic light scored. So if we go into this and take a bit of a closer look, we can see we've got some goals attached here as well. And the PBS support, or the PBS risk assessment, even goes into a bunch of different areas. So we've got our environmental triggers with the ability to score this based on the level of risk that we've identified, and of course, add those comments. The frequency that behaviours of concern may happen, the severity of those behaviours, and then, of course, the consequences. And again, this is just a guideline. So the idea is that you can use these as a prompt, and then comments can be added so that the PD assessment, even the risk assessment, like the PBS, is very much tailored to the needs of each individual here. You then get an overall outcome score based on our inputs here and what we've added in terms of comments, and we add in those actions for the team in order to mitigate the risks that we've identified in each of these areas. We had a bit of a question earlier about accessing this within the system. So if we just come out into the settings, to turn this on, if you're a current Log My Care user, you go into Preferences and General, scroll down to the bottom here, and then you can see there's an option for support plan preferences. You just have to have this toggled on. And then if we go back to Jim here, we can see it comes up as an option within his care planning for PBS support plan. Perhaps so a successful PBS plan in Log My Care should ultimately result in a reduced number of incidents occurring, an integration with existing goal setting, as we've seen at the bottom here for Jim. So this is that part that Giuseppe was really emphasizing, that need to recognize what we can do in order to ensure someone's leading a fulfilled and happy life to reduce the escalation of behaviors ultimately. And lastly, and most importantly, is that this should be collaborative and truly person-centered by encouraging that individual to communicate what support they need to live a life that meets their needs and is fulfilling. One way that we've enabled this is by adding the ability for those who support to sign here. And if that person lacks the capacity or the ability to sign, we would answer no, and then we'd be prompted to have someone next of kin or someone with LPA to sign on their behalf. But that can then be e-signed by that person or the individual you're supporting, and then a comment can be added here from them as well, adding to their own care record and taking that agency. Fab. So we've talked about collaboration and the agency. We've covered that there with the signature. Last thing to mention here is that, as with other documents in Log My Care, there's the ability to demonstrate that this is a live, evolving document that changes over time. So you've got a version history evidencing how this adapts and changes to the different needs of the individual. Fab, thanks so much for joining us today. That was pretty much everything I wanted to show you in the system. We will be sending out the recording and resources with a pack, with a template for PBS planning as well after the webinar. So that will help you, get started and start embedding PBS plans if you guys haven't already in your own organisation. I think that's about all we've got time for today. Again, thanks so much for joining us, both Mark and Giuseppe. It's been super valuable and really great to get your input. And really appreciate everyone else joining as well.
Thank you for your invite.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye.